The following presentation focuses on the attendance rates of Australian Indigenous students in the primary school sector. Through research, a strategic plan has been created in an aim to address the gap between school attendance of Indigenous and non-Indigenous students. Data from the Australian Curriculum Assessment and Reporting Authority, National Indigenous Australian Agency, and the Australian Bureau of Statistics all show a difference in attendance levels between Indigenous and non-Indigenous students. Attendance levels are based on students that attend school 90% of the time. The majority of Indigenous students attend school for an average of just over 4 days a week. The statistics are even lower for the 17% of students between the age of 5 to 17 that live in remote communities. Children in these communities only attended school 3 to 4 days per week on average. In comparison, school attendance rates for non-Indigenous students do not vary this substantially between remote and metro communities. In 2018, the national school attendance rate was around 82% for Indigenous students. This compares to an attendance rate for non-Indigenous students of around 93%. The gap in attendance rate has not improved in recent years, with still around a 10% gap between Indigenous and non-Indigenous students. The gap in school attendance is evident from when children start school. Among primary school students, the attendance gap was around 8% in difference when compared to Indigenous and non-Indigenous students. The gap increases in secondary school to around 14% gap for Indigenous students. On a state level, there has been no improvement in attendance rates for Indigenous students across all the states and territories. The largest change has been in the Northern Territory, where the attendance rate fell by around 5% between 2014 and 2018. Declines of around 2% or less have been observed in the attendance rate for Indigenous students in all other jurisdictions. The aim of this plan is to improve school attendance rates of Indigenous students and help to close the gap between Indigenous and non-Indigenous students. This strategic plan uses Easton's cycle of data use for continuous improvement. It has been found through the data that attendance rates for Indigenous students are currently problematic and an improvement is needed. Easton's theory views data as a tool for school improvement. The theory implements a 4-step process that works towards continuous improvement through the use of feedback. Step 1 uses data to identify a problem, while Step 2 identifies the problem solution. Step 3 monitors continuous progress, and Step 4 uses research to examine the impact. The 4-step process works towards the goal of continuous improvement and feedback. It starts with identifying the problem, suggesting solutions, monitoring progress as solutions are implemented, and understanding how the solutions are working. It's an ongoing process that ensures that solutions are supported with the use of evidence gained from research. Justification is also needed in order to see why solutions are working or not working. This model includes continuous improvement, which allows for feedback and collaboration amongst educators, which in turn gives multiple perspectives and solutions. These perspectives and solutions can then be analysed, and the data can then be tailored specifically to allow for more informed decisions and greater chance of improvement overall. This strategic report has focused on 3 public primary schools in a similar demographic area within WA. The 3 schools are Adam Road Primary School, Cooinda Primary School, and East Waikiki Primary School. At Adam Road Primary School, 12% of students identify as Indigenous. At Cooinda Primary School, 10% of students identify as Indigenous. And at East Waikiki Primary School, 15% of students identify as Indigenous. All 3 schools have a gap between attendance levels, with Indigenous students all having lower attendance levels than that of non-Indigenous students. When considering the key values, data ethics is important to consider. Data ethics is the moral obligations of gathering, protecting, and using personal identifiable information and how it affects the individuals. It's important to protect privacy of all those involved and ensure that the intent of collecting the data is entirely necessary. Another key value is ensuring data is secured effectively and personal information is always protected. Cultural sensitivity must also be considered. These values set a standard for all involved and allow for ethical interactions between all individuals. Attendance is considerably lower for non-Indigenous students in primary school. Attendance levels are important for students to succeed and set students up for the future. A lack of attendance should be addressed early to prevent students from falling behind and having further absences. This strategic plan focuses on the possible ways to lower absence levels for 3 public schools in Western Australia. The plan is to increase attendance levels within these 3 schools by 10 to 15% within the next 5 years. It is also important to encourage further collection of data within these 5 years. In order to put this plan into action, it is aimed to create a community that engages with one another and supports each other to combat issues. Data is also going to be collected in order to enhance understanding of the current and future situation. And the data will be refined to include more specific audiences that require further support. Staff within the education sector will also be given extra training in order to combat any cultural barriers that might be present. Data collection will also be made more specific and will be collected from all students each term. A more extensive leadership team will also be built up in an aim to be the governing body for collection of all this data. This will ensure consistency and strengthen collaboration within the team. These steps will be applied using evidence-based strategies to target the number of absences for Indigenous students at all 3 schools. The data will allow for understanding of the reasons behind all the absences, and this will ensure students will receive individualised, targeted learning and support from all their teachers. From this data, teachers and schools can then put new measures in place. But it is important to ensure that any measure put in place is culturally sensitive and responsive to Indigenous students, their families and communities. Collecting and reviewing data will allow for adjustments to be made to the strategic plan as it is implemented, thus allowing room for growth and further achievement. Implementing targeted programs and education through providing teachers with the correct tools and resources in order to understand Indigenous cultures and demographics, theoretically should increase attendance by 10 to 15% within the next 5 years, if implemented effectively.